Okay, so Shabbat Shalom to everybody here, those who are online today and those who are watching later. This week's portion is Jethro. And so we're starting in Exodus chapter 18.
18.
And it starts in verse 1, and we're going to go through chapter 20, verse 26. Okay, and so before we get into the parsha for this year, this is the 17th portion of the year. Okay, and 17, the 17th letter of the Hebrew alphabet. Let me make it fixed so that way.
Hey, everybody, Debbie, Dawn, Ken, Sandra, everybody.
Hey.
So there's the wicked.
Shalom.
So sorry. Okay, so the 17th letter of the year is pay. Okay, the 17th, not the letter of the year, but the 17th letter is the pay. And I just wanted to show you the pay because the pay looks similar to a bait. Okay, but they're slightly different. Like you can see, this one has like the little tilde here on the end. Okay, so this is the 17th letter of the Hebrew alphabet, and it is connected. Actually, the word pay in Hebrew means mouth, indicating your speech. And so it has a hidden bait within it. Okay, so the pay is the letter that means mouth, but it also has the hidden bait. So within this letter, that is like Yah is speaking to his house or his bride. Okay. And this parsha is one of the shortest because this, thinking about the 17th, this is one of the shortest here. And even though it's short, it does contain a lot of information, especially that is foundational to our faith, like the giving of the 10 commands. So, as we begin this study, before I go into Yitro, this past Sunday was a holiday, a Jewish holiday, which was called Tu'B Shevat, which was Tu'B is the 15th day of Shavuot, the month of Shavuot, which is actually the new year of the trees. And so a lot of people don't know, like, why would we have to have a New Year's of the trees, and why is this important? And according to like biblical law in the scriptures, there is a 7-year agricultural cycle, a cycle concluding with, the sabbatical year. Okay. And when the temple stood in Jerusalem on year 1, 2, 4, and 5, people were required to, separate a tenth or a tithe of their produce and eat it in Jerusalem. On the 3rd and 6th years of the cycle, instead of the owners eating what they call the second tithe, the Maaser Sheni in Jerusalem, they gave a part to the poor who were permitted to consume it as they wished. And this is, you can see in the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 14, verse 22 through 29. And so I wanted to think about this as we're looking about the New Year's of the trees, that there's another command that is dealing with trees. And it's in Leviticus chapter 19 in verse 23. And it says, when you enter the land and plant various kinds of fruit trees, you are to regard its fruit as forbidden. For 3 years, it will be forbidden to you, and you are not to eat it. Okay, so in the 4th year, the fruit is holy, it's for praising Yah, but in the 5th year, you may eat of its fruit. So when you think about it, if you planted a tree, you had to know how old that tree was in order whether or not you could eat from it. Because the first 3 years you weren't to eat from it. So clearly here you need to know, what year the tree is. And that's why there is a holiday called the New Year of the Trees. And this is the time of year that they go out and planting new trees too.
You think the first 2 years it didn't bear fruit till mature?
Well, it would bear fruit, but the first 3 years it says you are forbidden to eat it. And you think about, I think part of it is probably the sap going up into the fruit and making it more productive or whatever. So those first 3 years, you are not to eat of it. The fourth year, whatever the fruit was to be presented as an offering. And it wasn't until the fifth year that you actually ate of it. So, but I did want to make a spiritual connection here because in Psalms chapter 1, in verse 1, it says, okay, Psalms 1:1. How blessed are those who reject the advice of the wicked. Don't stand on the way of sinners or sit where scoffers sit. Their delight is in Yah's Torah, and on his Torah they meditate day and night. They are like trees planted by the streams, and they bear their fruit in season. Their leaves never wither. Everything they do succeeds. And so man is likened to a tree. And so there are links, since we had Tu'B Shevat this past week, that there are links to us as well. And if you think about a tree grows from a seed that's planted in the ground. And, its roots, for the most part, are underneath the ground, and while it's true that the leaves nurture the tree by absorbing the sunlight, it's the roots that are the mainstay of that tree. And they, if you sever the roots, the tree is going to wither and die. And so the roots actually stabilize the tree and provide the source of life. And so think about us. If we are likened to a tree, okay, and we think about what does a tree need to survive? A tree needs sunlight or sun, the light to grow. It needs carbon dioxide, and it also needs a juice, okay? And the midst of the tree is water, mayim. So if man is likened to a tree, we also need light, the light of Yah. We need, the ruach, like the wind, the oxygen, the breath of Yah. And we also need a meats. And what is this juice or whatever that we need? Well, it is the source of life for us, and it's twofold. It is one physical and one spiritual. So the physical meats that we have is our blood, but the spiritual meats that we have is actually coming from the mitzvot. And if you think about in Matthew chapter 19, verse 17, he says, why are you asking me about good? There is one who is good. But if you want to obtain eternal life, observe the mitzvot. And the observing of the mitzvot or doing the word is life for us. And so, us as a tree, if we've got that imagery of a tree, we too need to be doing his mitzvot. So I wanted to link that into this parsha as we go into Yitro. Now, this is one of the few parsha that are named after a person. Because like we have Balak, we have Sarah. So some of them are named after good people. Some of them are bad people here. But it's interesting that this one is not named after Moshe, because this is going to be giving of the 10 Commandments. But instead, it's not named after, commandments. It's not named after Moshe. It's named after Moshe's father-in-law, who was a Gentile, someone from the nations. And so why would this parsha be named after this person instead of the one who is actually receiving Yah's commands?
Was a priest of Midian.
Yeah, he was a priest of Midian too.
They were pagans.
They were pagans, yeah.
Pagan priest.
Mhm.
It's not the one true God.
Right.
Okay.
Right. And so, if you thought about,
So he had all those dollars.
right.
And
Mhm. But this parsha is named after him instead. Any thoughts? No. Okay. Well, Yithro's name means abundance. And we know, like Mom was saying, yes, he is a Midianite. He's Moshe's father-in-law. He was a pagan priest. But I think another hidden meaning within his name is that Yithro can be broken down into the prefix Yud, which means he will. And then you have the Tav and the Resh, which is Tur, which means to search out. And then you have the Vav at the end of his name, which makes it possessive, his third person possessive. So in a way, his name can be read, he will search out his own. And that's what Yah is doing with giving of these commands. He's going to search out what is his own. And there's a verse in Jeremiah 17:10, where he says, I, Yah, search the heart. I test the inner motivations in order to give everyone what his actions and conduct deserve. So, and like I said, his name comes from, it means abundance or an excess. It also means, like, if you think about, if you're, making clothes or whatever, and you have a part of it left over, that is a yithro, a yeter, an abundance, excess, or a remnant, so his name not only means, remnant, but it also means he will search out his own.
Well, why the different change names? He's got 2 or 3 different names.
Yeah, he's got 7 names. Yeah.
Is it because of the paganism or
Why the 7 names? And I think a lot of it has to do with what the names mean. And it's not necessarily, it's
so
like,
did he himself just use those names at certain times?
I wonder about in scripture, a lot of times when I think it's calling people by these different names, it's not necessarily a name. It's more like a nickname, or because we look at it as a name but what it means.
Yeah.
That, like Ruiel, he's called Ruiel, which is friend of God. So instead of just saying, here comes Yithro or whatever is saying his name, you're just using a description of him. You're describing him. So I'm thinking a lot of times that's what's happening, is it's more of a description of who he is instead of a literal name. We're just translating it as a name.
And it's kind of hard to separate because of him being a priest of Midian, having only the daughters, but him traveling, and then he uses another name. I mean, and he goes by it.
Yeah.
You think,
Right, because he's actually called Ruiel, Yitro, Yeter, which is the root for remnant there. Hovav, Haver, Kenai, and Putiel. So each one of those have a different meaning. So, and I think that's what it's talking more about of a description. But usually it will say, this is Moshe's father-in-law. So, it helps you there to figure out who it's talking about.
right. Yeah.
Okay, so thinking about his name here and what his name means and the connections that it has, even with the remnant and a remnant not being wiped out or exterminated, and connecting it with the letter Pei that has the hidden bait in it, that Yah is speaking to his house, his remnant here. And that this is, why part of the reason why I think that this portion is named Yithro is not because of he was this pagan priest, but it was because the hidden meaning within his name. And that we see that, there are, even years later, we see the prophets like Isaiah and Jeremiah giving prophecies about a remnant returning. Isaiah 10:21 says a remnant will return, the remnant of Yaakov, to the mighty God. In Jeremiah 23:3, he says, I myself will gather what remains of my flock from the countries. Well, what remains? The remnant, where I've driven them, and bring them back to their homes, and they will be fruitful and increase their numbers. So there is this prophecy of a remnant returning, and it's not, Yah knows the future as well as where they are now. That hasn't happened yet, but it's like this prophetic picture.
And two, just right when it first starts here about Yitro, he asks Moses, what is he doing? And he kind of like, I know he doesn't believe in the one true God, but he said, yeah, Moses told him about what the one God
Mhm.
had done. And he said, well, that is good.
Right.
But then he starts giving advice as this, he said, because God would have you to do this.
Right. Okay. Let's get to that. Or let's look at this. Okay. Exodus 18:1. Now Yitro, the priest of Midian, Moshe's father-in-law, heard all that Elohim had done for Moshe and for Israel, his people, and how Yah had brought Israel out of Egypt. After Moshe had sent away his wife Zipporah and her 2 sons, Yitro, Moshe's father-in-law, had taken them back. The name of one son was Gershom, for Moshe had said, I have been a foreigner in the foreign land, because Gershom means a foreigner. Okay. The name of the name of the other was Eleazar, or my God helps, because the God of my father helped me by rescuing me from Pharaoh's sword. Yitro, Moshe's father-in-law, brought Moshe's sons and wife to him in the desert where he was encamped at the mountain of God. Okay, so first of all, let's remember, who the Midianites were. The Midianites are the descendants from Abraham and Keturah. So these were children or descendants of Abraham. Okay. And so, but even though they had Abraham as, an ancestor, they still, went mixed worship in pagan ways. Okay. And that's probably from Keturah's line. So Yithro, is Moshe's father-in-law. Okay. And so we've got Yithro, Zipporah, Moshe's wife, and Moshe's 2 sons are coming to meet him at the mountain of God. So let's think about this for a minute. Where we are in the world. They left Egypt, they came out of Egypt, and now think about all of this land. Midian is Saudi Arabia. If you think about Saudi Arabia, how big it is. They're going up to Israel. How did they know where to meet? How did they? Yep, email. They didn't have email. They didn't have.
Told his wife where to meet him.
But how did he know that they were going to come out at that time?
Says he'd never been in the land before, so he
had been into Midian before.
But just Midian as far as that, and then God called him to wander,
Yeah, and so you think about that. That's you got how big the desert is there. They could have been anywhere.
Right.
There's lots of mountains there. We think of mountains, mountains covered with rock, but they're mountains. So how did he know which mountain to meet? And, when I was thinking about this, I got to thinking, wait a minute, this mountain is not a new place for them. We forget what happened
Abraham.
with this mountain. So we're going to go back a few chapters. Okay, let's go to Exodus chapter 3.
Chapter what?
3.
20.
No, chapter 3.
3. Yeah, 3.
3 of 1.
And I'm going to go to verse 1. So now Moshe was tending the sheep of Yithro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, leading the flock to the far side of the desert. He came to the mountain of God, to Horeb. And the angel of Yah appeared to him in a fire blazing from the middle of a bush. And he looked, and what he saw, although the bush was flaming with fire, the bush was not being consumed or burned up. And Moshe said, I'm going over to see and what is this amazing sight and find out why the bush isn't burned up. So Moshe's encounter with the burning bush is at the mountain of God, which is called Horeb. Okay. And we know when he has this encounter with this burning bush, this is where Yah reveals his name to Moshe. Okay, so if we think about Saudi Arabia, Midian is over on the far side of Saudi Arabia. And then Moshe's leading the flock back toward Egypt, and he encounters this mountain and this burning bush. Okay, so if we think about location, we've got Egypt over here, but then if we're going toward the east, we'll get to Horeb before we get to Midian. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Okay. And so here we've got Moshe encountering this burning bush, but I missed this. I don't know. I didn't see this before, but as I was looking at this, Yah tells him here when he encounters him at this burning bush that you're going to worship me on this mountain.
Mhm.
Okay, go down to verse 11, chapter 3, verse 11. Moshe said to Elohim, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and lead the people of Israel out of Egypt? And he replied, I will surely be with you. Your sign that I have sent you will be that when you've led the people out of Egypt, you will worship God on this mountain.
He's telling him too.
He's telling him in advance.
He'll lead the people out.
Yeah, he's telling them in advance. You're going to lead them out of Egypt. And when you do, this is where you're going to come. Did y'all ever see that before? I mean, I didn't. I mean, how many times I've read it, I hadn't really thought about that. He already told them this is where he's going to come so that, you know, when they do start coming out of Egypt, Yitro knows exactly where he's going. He knows where Moshe's going to go.
Yeah, but he didn't know when you.
He didn't know exactly when. Yeah. Okay. If we go to chapter 4 in Exodus. Here is before he goes back to Egypt to lead the people out. Chapter 4, go down to verse 27. Yah said to Aaron, go into the desert to meet Moshe. And he went and he met him at the mountain of God and he kissed him. So Moshe was in Midian with Jethro and Zipporah, and then he's going to leave and go to Egypt, and he meets Aaron at this same mountain. So after the Exodus, you know, the children of Israel, after they leave Egypt, they're going to all these different locations, encampments, and, you know, we discussed in last week's parsha, Beshalach, the two stories about the lack of water at Mara and Refidim. Now we see that we have a retelling of events at Refidim in this week's parsha. Okay. And if we think about, you know, last year's Torah portion that I did on Yitro, I went through discussing how things in scripture weren't written in chronological order. And we can't read things in the scriptures like they're happening in sequence. Okay. For example, let's go to Exodus chapter 17. And I know we're going back some, but I wanted to, you know, because to make sense with this as you're reading, because a lot of times we miss it. In Exodus chapter 17, verse 1. You know, this is when they came out of Egypt. There's, you know, stopping at encampments. In chapter 17, verse 1, it says, the whole community of the people of Israel left the Sin desert, traveling in stages as Yah had ordered, and they camped at Rephidim, but there was no water for the people to drink. And the people quarreled with Moshe, demanding, give us water to drink. But Moshe replied, why pick a fight with me? Why are you testing Yah? However, the people were thirsty for water there and grumbled against Moshe. For what did you bring us up from Egypt to kill us, our children, our livestock with thirst? And Moshe cried out to Yah, what am I to do with these people? They're ready to stone me. And Yah answered Moshe, go on ahead of the people and bring with you the leaders of Israel. Take your staff in your hand, the one you used to strike the river, and go. I will stand in front of you there on the rock in Horeb. You are to strike the rock and water will come out of it so the people can drink. Moshe did this in the sight of the leaders of Israel. So not only is this mountain where he encountered Yah, and Yah revealed his name to him in the burning bush. This is where he meets Aaron before he goes back to Egypt. And now, after they leave Egypt, they say they're camped at Refidim, which had to be close enough to this mountain, because instead of actually striking a rock there, he says, you go over right there and you strike the rock on this mountain, and this is where I'm going to bring forth water. And so this happens at Horeb, which is called the mountain of God, which we also see it called Sinai. If we go into this week's portion in Exodus 19, chapter 19, verse 1. In the third month, after the people of Israel had left the land of Egypt, the same day they came to the Sinai desert. So they just left Rephidim, and all of a sudden they're at the Sinai. So it's like the deserts, meet. He went from the Sin desert to the Sinai desert. Arriving at the Sinai, they set up camp in front of the mountain, and Israel set up camp, and Moshe went up to Elohim, and Yah called to him from the mountain, here is what you are to say to the household of the people, household of Yaakov, to tell the people of Israel. So it's very close to Rephidim, okay? And this mountain is referred to as the mountain of God prior to giving the Torah. And I had not thought about that before. It's called the mountain of God before the Torah was ever given. I always associated it just with the giving of the Torah. But it's the same mountain where Yah revealed himself in the burning bush. So this was a place that was already established, a pattern that Yah's revealing himself to them.
Mm-hmm. That was the place, the mountain he had already picked out.
Yes.
Way back.
Right.
To Moses. And also they thought the Amalekites and all there, so the Amalekites knew of the mountain and everything.
Right.
And I guess they were trying to conquer as much land as they could anyway, Amalek and all them.
Yeah. And so, and do you think about, so yeah, Amalek's got to be close to there too. And you think about, Yah has this pattern, and we remember that the Bible was written for people that were living in ancient times. And it was written through that ancient lens. There's a prophecy in Isaiah 46, and I'm going to read this because we've read it before. 46:10, it says, at the beginning, I announced the end. And we've always talked about that, about going back to Genesis. If you want to know what's going to happen in the end times, you go back to Genesis. And we've used that many times. But if you keep reading that verse, this is what it says. At the beginning, I announced the end and proclaim in advance things not yet done. And I say that my plan will hold. I will do everything I please to do. Okay, that's the way the complete words it in their version. I do want to read it in a different version here, so I'm going to read it in the King James, and it says, declaring the end from the beginning, from ancient times, the things that are not yet done, saying, my counsel shall stand, and I will do all of my pleasure. Okay. Now, if I look at this verse in the Hebrew, okay, and I'm going to, look at the last part of that verse there, not the first part. I want to actually, the first after, I'll go ahead and start at the beginning. So that first part of the verse reads in Hebrew, Magid Mereshit, Aharit Uk Mekedim Asher Lo Naasu. Okay, so Magid, you're going to declare, Mereshit, from the beginning, Acharit, the end, and it says, Mikadim, okay, from ancient times, Asher, that, Lo Naasau, that which is not done, okay? And what really stuck out to me this time is that when you look at that verse and we've read over it, talking about doing the end from the beginning, the end from the beginning, but we don't look at the next part where it says focusing on the ancient times. We've all gone back to the beginning, go to understand, we go back to Genesis in the front of the book to understand the end of the book, but we should also look at what they understood in ancient times. How did they understand what they are writing? Not how do we understand and interpret it today? And I think that's what part of the problem is people are interpreting it from their understanding of today, not how it was written to the people that they understood it, because that's what it was written to them. Not to us, but it is applicable to us today.
Well, in Moses' time, we just assume the desert is big open space, but it's not, because we've seen that when we got there, where you could think we're civilization
right
throughout generation. So at this time, there had to be nomad tribes of people living.
Different places,
But they had to live close to water at some point. So
right.
Each tribe could do like the.
Yeah, they're going to need water. Yeah, they're going to need some kind of well or spring or something. Yeah.
And that's why Amalek was conquering those places, because he came there to fight.
Right.
So, you don't think about there's people, we see
that are living,
but there was communities back then,
right,
of tribes living together,
right.
Then another place, and they all lived in tents.
Right, but then you also had large areas of
vast
desert, because like now when you go to Israel, you're driving through, so it didn't take you long to drive through. But if you're walking or you're going by camel, you're not going to see, you're not going to see how fast how far they are or how close together they are. It's going to take you a lot longer.
It took a long time, like days to walk from one place
to another. Right. Yeah. Okay. So in the last few parsha, I talked about how the plagues, were this cosmic showdown displaying that Yah was the supreme God over all. And in the ancient Near East, there was a well-established pattern that after a victory, it would lead to a procession where the divine warrior that did the victory would lead the people, and they would ascend to this cosmic mountain or the mountain of their God. That was well established in ancient times. We see the same pattern happening here. We see a pattern of a proclamation, a procession, and an enthronement happening, that Moshe and the children of Israel proclaim who their God is in Egypt. They applied the blood over their doorpost, saying that this is the God that they're going to follow. And Moshe is seen as like a divine warrior's proxy who leads them out of Egypt. It's a procession of them going out. And then Moshe leads them to meet their God on top of this mountain, Mount Sinai, where he forms what? His kingdom. He gives them the covenant, and he's forming this kingdom. And this was an ancient pattern of kings during those days. When you start going through and looking at even like Greece and Rome, they built their temples not in valleys, but on top of mountains, because in their mind, that is where their gods reside.
The gods.
Mm-hmm. And as they would have, as they came out of Egypt, what happened? We read last week. What did Miriam do? She started singing this song, okay? The victory song. Mm-hmm. There was the victory song, and that was part of the procession, is that you would have this victory song proclaimed.
You have to think too, at the time God first showed himself to Moses in the burning bush. Mm-hmm. From that time on, that was the only thing right there he showed Moses. But all these people that came out, they were coming out and they knew they were coming out in an unknown God. You couldn't see, you couldn't
Right.
touch, you couldn't pray to it, you couldn't bring it out and look at it.
Right.
It was,
It was, yeah.
And they followed what
Just
Moses
because-
said, because Moses could hear God speak to him. And, you had to want, that's millions of
Yeah,
people.
that
Not
came
a
out, yeah.
few, that's millions. And so that was, a lot of years and a lot of travel.
Going back to last week's portion, just looking at the song here, the victory song in Exodus 15, verse 17, it says, "You will bring them in and plant them on the mountain, which is your heritage, the place, Yah, that you made your abode, the sanctuary, Yah, which your hands established, and Yah will reign forever and ever." So not only was Yah going to bring them out to Mount Sinai to meet him, and this is where he's basically becoming enthroned as their king, and they come into this covenantal relationship with him. And that's where, we have the giving of the 10 commands, Shavuot celebrated. And, Shavuot commemorates the receiving of the Torah and the celebration of the first fruits and the wheat harvest. This occurs on the 6th day of the month of Sivan, the Hebrew month of Sivan. That's when Shavuot is. And so what I found interesting is that according to tradition, that date that Shavuot is the same date that Moshe, when he was a baby, was placed in the waters of the Nile River in the ark. Okay. That, according to tradition, they, when you think about this pattern, because what happened, what was Moshe? Moshe was going to be this divine leader. He is placed in this waters, and waters in the ancient Near East represented chaos. And that is where the gods of the death and, the deep resided. And that, in the Nile River, he's placed in there in an ark. And he was rescued by Pharaoh's daughter. And then he ends up leading the people out to this mountain and being this, divine warriors, meeting them to this God on this mountain. And we see, it was at this mountain that actually the articles for the tabernacle are built. They're camped there, which I didn't even really think about that. But in Numbers 10:33, it says they set out from Yah's mountain and traveled 3 days. Ahead of them on this 3-day journey went the Ark of Yah's covenant, searching for a new place to stop. And so they built the articles for the Mishkan right here at this mountain at Mount Sinai. And so mountains, like I said, are important in ancient times. I failed to see the importance of all the things that occurred at this mountain because I only thought about it with the giving of the Torah. I didn't associate, I read it, but I never really thought about this is where the burning bush happened. This is where he met Aaron. This is where he comes back to that Yah tells him, you're going to worship on this mountain. And this is where I'm going to give you my commands, and we're going to come into covenant together. So, okay.
What got me, I know you're going to go into it, was Moses was married when he saw the burning bush.
Mm-hmm.
He possibly already had 2 children at that time, but he never ever took them with him to do anything or in the traveling or anything. He left them with.
Well, they started coming along the way, and you remember Zipporah ended up doing the circumcision, and she said, "You're going to be a bloody bridegroom for me."
Yeah,
and we've taken that to mean part of the circumcision, but it's also been taken to mean that she was recognizing how much you're going into Egypt, and you're going to come against one of the greatest kings of the world here, and you're going to be a bloody bridegroom for me. And that it said that Moshe sent her away. And it's like, some people look at, oh, well, he divorced her, he sent her back, or she just went back to stay with her father-in-law or her father.
Because of the hardship that was going to be endured.
We don't know for sure. Yeah.
His children.
Yeah.
And he was trying to avoid that for them because he would be busy all the time.
Right. We don't know for sure. We just know, he just sent them back, and that she goes back and stays with Yitro.
And he may send them back because he knew they would be safe.
They would be safe there. Yeah. So. Okay, so let's go to Exodus 18 and verse 10.
Hey, Lisa.
Yeah, go ahead.
So if Moshe was there at Shavuot, and it seems like he was a nursing child, do you think he may have been born about
Moshe was a
7
nursing.
weeks?
Wait. What?
Well, you said Moshe was put in the ark on Shavuot in the river.
On the same date when he's at years later. Because he didn't,
but I mean, it would have corresponded with that date when he was a child.
Yeah, right.
So do you think he may have been born 7 weeks earlier? And, that would have been around the Passover.
Around his birthday, that I don't know. Well, it said, because she kept him for 3 months.
Oh, okay. All right.
Didn't she keep him for 3 months before she put him in there?
Hide him
Right.
Of him getting bigger.
Right.
Okay.
So his birthday probably would have been around the 3rd month.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so Exodus 18:10, Yitro said, "Blessed be Yah who has rescued you from the Egyptians and from Pharaoh, who has rescued you from the people, from the harsh hand of the Egyptians. Now I know that Yah is greater than all other gods, because he rescued those who were treated so arrogantly." Yitro, Moshe's father-in-law, brought a burnt offering and sacrifices to Elohim, and Aaron came with all of the leaders of Israel to share the meal before God with Moshe's father-in-law. Okay, so first thing, like in verse 10, look at what Yitro says. Blessed be Yah. So he knew the name, and he's bringing a burnt offering, an olah, and a zevach. So, it's believed that he is actually putting away his pagan ways here, and he's actually converting or, crossing over into a life of following Yah.
He's doing the ritual.
Yes.
You're supposed to do it, the burnt offering,
Right. Okay. But think about this a minute. Wait a minute. Here we are in Exodus 18. They're at this mountain. We haven't gotten to the giving of the commands yet. Wait a second. He's bringing an offering and sacrifices. Where are they offering and sacrificing? Because the articles for the tabernacle haven't been built yet.
Does it come back from Adam and Eve,
Yeah, and this is 2 thoughts. There's one is that, they spent a year here building the articles, and that actually what we're reading is happening after the giving of Torah and after they built the articles. That's what some, say. Like some scholars believe, like I said, the story is actually put right here in the scriptures because of the fact that what happened right before this was the battle with Amalek.
Right.
And that a lot of times that this, like I said, that's not in order chronologically, that when it was put here for the intent of showing that the pattern of war with the nations wasn't being established. When you would come up to someone who is from a different nation, you don't automatically go to war with them like you did Amalek. That here you had someone from the nations, but this person you're not going to war with just because they're from the nations.
And then Moses, and when they came out and wore like battle. I mean, you know.
Arrayed for battle, yeah.
Yes, they had all the stuff that the Egyptians, they plundered
Mhm.
enough for the, I guess, the cloth material.
Right.
Things like that, silver to melt.
To be able to build the,
To.
yeah,
do
the tabernacle. Mhm.
tabernacle.
Yeah,
So it was brought with them, but it had to be done at a point, but like you say, it's not
Right.
chronological order, so.
okay, just to point out that this is not in chronological order again. Okay, look here, Exodus 18, verse 5. Yitro brought Moshe's father-in-law brought Moshe's sons and his wife to him in the desert where he was encamped at the mountain of God. Okay, so we see this in verse 5. This is the setting where Yitro meets Moshe. They're at Mount Sinai. Go back to chapter 17. Okay, look at verse, well, I read this earlier, 1 through, I'll read it again. But in verse 1, the whole community left Israel. So they hadn't even got to Sinai yet. They're in the Sin Desert traveling in stages, and they ain't even got to Refidim. Okay, so we see here that chapter 18 is happening after 17. So that seems like it's in order. Okay, but wait a second. Let's go over to chapter 19. Chapter 19, verse 1. In the 3rd month after the people of Israel had left the land of Egypt, the same day they came into Sinai, after setting out from Rephidim and arriving at the Sinai desert, they're setting up camp in the desert. So chapter 19 takes you back to where they're coming out of Egypt, they go to Rephidim, but they hadn't met Moshe's father-in-law yet. So
And this was just 3 months after Passover.
okay, so yeah, so
Passover is when they left.
right.
So it was just a few months after.
Right. So when you think about chapter 19, it is going back and telling when they first arrived at Mount Sinai.
Mhm.
But chapter 18, we see they're already at Sinai and they're meeting Jethro. So it is not in order. It's like you've got things out of order here. Okay. And if that's the case, the other thing, like I said, the other belief is, when they believe that Moshe meets Jethro here, they've already been camped there for a while, which is right beside Midian. There's all these millions of people there.
Mhm.
Of course, when Jethro's going out with his flocks, they're eventually going to see that these people are all there and they've been there for a year, and then he meets them. So that's the other,
That's a lot of people too.
Right. So you would see.
That it's just like maybe this little block here of houses.
Right.
I mean, that's a million, what was it, 6 million? They said
Yeah.
really went out.
Yeah. So definitely.
And that's a lot of people.
People,
And
yeah.
That's a lot of tents. That's a lot of encampments.
And so if that's the case, that he met him after the giving of the commands, then the tent that's referred to in verse 7 in chapter 18 is possibly the tent of meeting, and that they had the sacrifices and already had the altar and everything there.
Would that be the middle tent that, like, where everybody's counting them around? And
Yeah.
around that, he would be
In the altar.
the main one, but they wouldn't be right on him.
Right.
I mean, he had a space around him. Yeah.
And so, like I said, that theory that, there's also the thought that, these commandments weren't first given at Mount Sinai. That they were in existence and were taught to Adam in the garden, and that they were passed down to a righteous line. Because think about this. How did Noah know what animals were clean and unclean? If Torah wasn't given until Mount Sinai, how did he know which animals were clean or unclean?
Yeah.
And that's in Genesis chapter 7. Okay. That's prior to giving the commandments at Mount Sinai.
Like it's just passed down to us. We didn't know anything about it growing up.
Mhm.
And it's passed down to us to learn it and see it and know it.
Right. Okay. In Genesis chapter 9, chapter 9, verse 4, we're given a command not to eat blood.
Mhm.
But that's before the commandments were given on Mount Sinai. Okay. Look at Genesis 26 and verse 5. Abraham obeyed the mitzvot, hukot, and the Torah. How could he obey the mitzvot and the Torah before the Torah was given?
Well, somebody had to teach.
And somebody had to teach him. Yeah.
Teach him, and they say Shem did.
Right. So this is where it comes back to that the Torah was given and passed down, but it wasn't written down until we get to Mount Sinai.
I know in word it says that he would always have a remnant on the throne, and the throne, but also that remnant he's going to have is that teaching of the Torah. It's never going to fade. The Torah would always be. So from Adam on down, that has been
We see.
handed down even to now.
Because you think about it, if Adam walked in the garden with Yah, who's teaching him? Yah himself is teaching Adam.
Yeah.
He's teaching him things. They're walking together. They're talking. They're in a relationship with each other. He knows what Yah likes and what Yah doesn't like.
But how did Noah know to be a righteous man?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. How did he know how to be a righteous man? How did he know what was clean and unclean? How did Abraham obey the commands and the Torah when the Torah hadn't been given yet? Because they were given, it wasn't written down.
It was orally.
Yeah, it was orally. Okay, so Exodus 18, I'm going to go down to verse 13. We see Yitro is now going to see what it's like for Moshe. Okay. Verse 13. The following day, Moshe sat to settle disputes for the people, while the people stood around Moshe from morning till evening. When Moshe's father-in-law saw all that he was doing to the people, he said, "What is this that you're doing to the people? Why do you sit there alone and all the people are standing around you from morning till evening?" We've even taken this even and do this today. Because when you go into a court, the judge is sitting. But when you are given your verdict, or what do? You stand.
Yeah.
You have to stand. And that's what has happened here. The people are standing around for that. Okay, Moshe answered his father-in-law and said, "It's because the people come to me seeking God's guidance. Whenever they have a dispute, it comes to me. I judge between one person and another, and I explain to them God's laws and his teachings." Okay, now this is before Mount Sinai. How did he know what the God's laws and teachings were?
Now, this is the part I was talking to you about.
Okay.
What you're fixing.
Moshe's father-in-law said to him, "What you're doing isn't good. You will certainly wear yourself out, and not only yourself, but these people here with you as well. It's too much for you. You can't do it alone by yourself. So listen now to what I have to say. I will give you some advice, and God will be with you. You should represent the people before God, and you should bring their case to God. You should also teach them the laws and the teachings and show them how to live their lives, what work they do, but what work they should do. But you should choose from among all of the people competent men who are God-fearing, honest, and incorruptible to be their leaders, in charge of thousands, hundreds, fifties, and 10. Normally, they will settle the people's disputes. They should bring to you the difficult cases, but ordinary matters they should decide themselves. And in this way, they will make it easier for you and share the load with you. If you will do this, and God is directing you to do it, you will be able to endure, and all of these people too will arrive at their destination peacefully." Moshe paid attention to his father-in-law's counsel and did everything he had said. Okay.
There's another place in scripture where it talks about a division, doing so many people to do this, so many to do that. Is it in David?
Okay. Well, yeah, there's okay.
Let's talk about that.
So here, Moshe is a man who spoke face to face, with Yah here. Why would he take the advice of a pagan Midianite?
That's what I asked.
Okay.
Okay, that's what.
Is it because,
Speaking, saying, as God told Yitro.
okay, is it because Jethro became a believer, a convert? Is it because Jethro was his father-in-law and was this father figure to Moshe then?
I look at it as wise counsel.
And taking wise counsel? Okay.
Isn't it something about your father-in-law, you're supposed to honor that?
Be like honoring your father-in-law, okay?
Yeah, in scripture.
So,
And that, but, I mean, looks like he would wait to hear God. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
see what God was saying instead of listening to Yitro.
okay, I want to go to two other places just because this is interesting. Okay, Numbers chapter 11. Look at this. And see if you see something different. Numbers 11. And I'm going to go down to verse 9. Okay. When the dew settled on the camp during the night, the man came with it, the manna. And Moshe heard the people crying, family after family, each person at his entrance to his tent. And the anger of Yah flared up violently, and Moshe was too displeased. Moshe asked Yah, why are you treating your servant so badly? Why haven't I found favor in your sight so that you put the burden of this entire people on me? Did I conceive this people? Was I their father so that you can tell me, carry them in your arms like a nurse carrying a baby? So Moshe's complaining to Yah here, these people are too heavy for me. Okay, to the land that you swore to your ancestors, where I'm going to get meat, where am I going to get meat for this entire people? Because they keep bothering me with their crying and saying, give us meat to eat. I can't carry this entire people by myself alone. It's too much for me. If you are going to treat me this way, then just kill me outright. Please, if you have any mercy toward me, don't let me go on being this miserable. Verse 16, Yah said to Moshe, bring me 70 of the leaders of Israel, people you recognize as leaders of the people, officers of theirs, and bring them into the tent of meeting and have them stand there with you. I will come down and speak with you there, and I will take some of the spirit which rests on you and put it on them, and they will carry the burden of the people along with you so that you won't carry it alone yourself. So do you notice anything there?
Yeah, he's putting the spirit.
Okay, Yah says he's going to put a spirit on him.
Yeah,
But who told Moshe to do that?
I don't know, said to Moshe.
Yeah, okay.
That's what I'm saying. Why did he not say God?
It doesn't say Yitro here. It says
No.
Yah said to Moshe.
Yitro.
Okay. But Yitro isn't even here.
Yeah.
Okay. Deuteronomy chapter 1. Deuteronomy chapter 1, verse 6. Yah spoke to us in Horeb, and he said, you've lived long enough by this mountain. Turn, get moving, and go up to the hill country of the Emery and all the places near the Arava, the hill country, the Shephelah, the Negev, and by the seashore, the land of the Canaanite and Lebanon, as far as the great river Euphrates. I have set the land before you. Go in and take possession of the land which Yah swore to your ancestors, Abraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov, and to their descendants after that. At that time, I told you, you are too heavy of a burden for me to carry alone. Yah, your Elohim, has multiplied your numbers so that there are as many of you today as there are stars in the sky. May Yah, the Elohim of your ancestors, increase you yet 1,000-fold and bless you as he's promised you. But you are so burdensome, bothersome, and quarrelsome. How can I bear it myself alone? Pick from yourselves from each of your tribesmen, men who are wise, understanding, and knowledgeable, and I will make them heads over you. And you answered me, what have you said? What you have said would be a good thing for us to do. So I took the heads of your tribes, men wise and knowledgeable, make them heads over you, leaders in charge of thousands, of hundreds, and of fifties, and of tens, and officers tribe by tribe. At that time, I commissioned your judges to hear cases that would arise between you and your brothers and judge fairly between a man and his brother and the foreigner that is with him. You are not to show favoritism in judging, but to give equal attention to the small and to the great. No matter how a person presents himself, don't be afraid of him, because the decision is Elohim's. If the case is too hard for you, then bring it to me and I will hear it. I will also give orders at that time concerning all the things that you were to do.
Now, Adonai's giving it to me.
Right, right,
Before, if Jethro way on over that,
right. So in Exodus, it looks like Yitro told Moshe to do that. But in Numbers and in Deuteronomy, it looks like Yah's telling Moshe to do that.
did he speak through God? You know, he could use
Yeah.
enemies, you know, to do things, to speak to, you know.
So what is it?
So,
Did did Yithro tell Moshe? Or was it Yah told Moshe?
well, this was on the far side of the Yarden.
Mm-hmm.
They wasn't at Horeb,
Right.
but it still could have been God.
But he's talking back to when he appointed those leaders. Yeah.
Yeah, because the Adonai spoke to us in Horeb.
Yeah.
Because he had already spoke to them in Horeb.
Right.
So this is happening, verse 1 is happening.
So that's just something interesting to think about. I mean, I don't, is it Yah doing it and speaking through Yithro to do that? Or is it Yah already spoke it to Moshe and Yithro is confirming what?
No, I think
Yeah, so-
I think it was already spoken the way, because it's the way it's worded is Adonai spoke to us in Horeb.
Yeah.
He's speaking to Moses then.
To
And-
do it. Yeah. I don't know. But I just thought that was interesting because it looks like there's two different.
Yeah, I had wrote
Things
it down when I was studying this about it's two different people comparing the.
Yeah. Because who is going to be, who's actually said it.
And so the only thing I think now, me personally, is God spoke it to Moses before that, but then spoke it to Yithro, because this was with Yithro was later.
Right. And usually by the counsel of two or three that something is established.
He spoke, because he said back over that by God or something like, where was that? I done lost my place. Where was that? Anyway.
In Exodus,
Yithro
where-
said, listen to me, do this and this and this, because of your God will agree with this, or something like that. Where was that at?
In Exodus 18,
Down here somewhere. Yeah, by 50s, 100, they should.
and it says, if you do this in verse 23, God is directing you to do it, you will be able to endure.
So
Or is it that Yithro gave him the advice and Moshe went to Yah and Yah told him?
But he had already, y'all had already spoken way before that about this.
So
Yeah.
that's the question. So,
That's the thing on there.
yep.
Does anybody got-
Y'all have any comments on it? Any thoughts? They're all quiet. No, nobody say anything. So they're all quiet.
Nobody.
Okay. Okay.
Well, maybe most of it that you have to have enough knowledge to make judge.
Yeah. Well, he goes and he chooses some, yeah.
But didn't y'all put some of the spirit on Moses?
He put, he did. He put some of the spirit on him. Yeah, that's what it says. Okay, so Moshe is going to set up a judicial system here over the people. And so when you go and watch, the replay of this for those that are here on the YouTube, I've given it the title, not only Yithro, but from Sinai to the Sanhedrin, receiving and guarding the word, because the requirements for these judges, it says that they should, know and follow the Torah.
Mhm.
They should be capable men, men of strength, okay, or spiritual here. They should fear Yah, and they are men of truth. They hate profit, and they can't be bribed or bought with money or influence. I mean, you just think about if we had judges and leaders that were like that today.
We'd be in trouble.
I mean, just think about it. The world would be totally different.
Yep.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And this pattern that is given here is the same structure that is used later in creating the Sanhedrin. And there are many, I guess in this movement or whatever you want to call it, who don't want to be too Jewish, my air quotes here, Jewish, yet there are things that we see, as traditions, but they're actually rooted in scripture. And many people will see, the Sanhedrin and think it's something bad. They see it as, well, they're the ones who killed Yeshua. Yet the basis for the Sanhedrin was really given to Moshe here. And as we see, in these scriptures, it's given to him by Yah. And, we're going to touch on who was really responsible for Yeshua's death. Now, there were to be 70 men that was chosen plus Moshe. Okay. That's the same for the Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin was made up of 70 members plus the high priest. And the Sanhedrin actually had 3 courts of law. There was one that was at the entrance of the Temple Mount that was made up of 3 men. Okay. So, as you were coming into the area, you would, take your case to them or whatever. And if they couldn't, these 3, and there was always an odd number, if those 3 couldn't do it, then it went to the next one. Okay. And the second Sanhedrin was actually at the door of the temple court. It's called the small Sanhedrin. And it was made up of 23 men. Okay. And so again, it's an odd number. So you're not going to have, a tie, but they didn't do it. Then the third Sanhedrin was actually in the Beit Atinas, which is in the Hall of Hewn Stones. And it was made up of of the total of all 71 of them. Okay. And so just some things, because I know most people aren't real familiar with the Sanhedrin, that just some facts, and these are just a few facts about the Sanhedrin. One is that the Sanhedrin did not ever meet on Shabbat. They wouldn't meet on feast days or Shabbat. They would not have meetings in the evening. So think about that. They wouldn't have meetings in the evening. When was Yeshua's trial? It was at night.
Oh.
So was he really judged by the Sanhedrin? No, it couldn't have been the Sanhedrin. It was done. This is why, one reason why Yeshua's trial wasn't done by the Sanhedrin, it was actually done by a rogue group of those within the Sanhedrin, and it was invalid. And, remember years ago, I talked about Rabbi Ariel Cohen-Alero, who wants to do a retrial for Yeshua. And he's like, I'll be his lawyer because of the fact that I want to bring him back into Judaism, because it would be thrown out in the courts today because they violated the Sanhedrin's own laws. Okay. Something else that the Sanhedrin does is that they drew lots for the temple service. They're the ones who decides who gets to, go out and, get the ashes from the altar or whatever. They're the ones who draw the lots for that. Like, remember when it talks about for Elizabeth, remember in Zechariah, when the lot couldn't come up, the Sanhedrin would draw the lot and say, okay, that's your time to do this. Yes. Okay. They're the ones who arrange the calendar. They're the ones who judge, make the judgments according to law. Now, like I said, when we look at the members of the Sanhedrin, the members were the Nasi, which is like a president today, okay? And the Nasi only voted if there was a tie. So the Nasi, the leader of the Sanhedrin, didn't vote at all. They only voted if there was a tie, okay? They have like what they call an Av Beit Din, which is like a vice president, the father of the judgments, what it literally stands for, but they were part of the voting. Okay. They had 23 Cohen, and the Kohanim, of course, are in charge of the priestly things. They had 23 Levites. The Levites are, of course, in charge of anything that was Levitical. They had 23 judges from Israel, from all the tribes of Israel, okay? And these judges from Israel would judge on civil matters that weren't relating to the temple service. So when there was an issue, the Sanhedrin would judge on things. So, at the beginning, like the high priest or was what they called the Nasi, the president, until 191 BC. After that, there was an issue because the Sanhedrin lost confidence because of what had happened was the Hasmoneans come in and they were the kings, but they also took over part of the priesthood. And so when they did that, they established the office of actually a Nasi was established so that the high priest wasn't the Nasi, it was they chose a person to be the president. It was in the 1st century. This happened long before Josephus.
Yeah. Was he? Oh,
He was Jewish. Yeah, he's a historian that lived in the 1st century.
no, I think the one that Yeshua, it went and got his body. That was
Joseph of Arimathea.
Joseph.
Yeah.
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 He was in the mucky muck part because he didn't want
He
it,
was a wealthy man, we know.
but wasn't he in one part of the
We don't know that he was. Yeah.
statue? Yeah, I know that.
No.
But I know he went before.
He went before them because they had to rule on whether or not to give the body. Yeah.
And
But he wasn't, it doesn't mean that he was
I
high.
think he was part of the, they sit around in those,
Yeah, no, it was just that he went before them to that. And so one of the things to think of it, like our court system today is based on like the same pattern. If you go to your regular court and then you can appeal or whatever, and it's taken up to another court. It's taken up to another court. And then till we get to the Supreme Court, and then that's the same thing. I think so. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But all of the members, like I said, you've got the Levites, you've got the Kohanim, you've got the judges. They all basically are like specializing in a particular area. Okay. For example, if there was an issue involving the altar or sacrifices, then the Cohen would rule on those because the Levites have nothing to do with that. The leaders of Israel have nothing to do with that. That is under the Cohen's jurisdiction.
The Levites, since they do
The Levites didn't do sacrifices. The Cohen would do manipulating of the blood on the altar. I mean, the Levites could actually do a sacrifice, but they didn't manipulate the blood on the altar there.
Oh,
okay. So it's like, if we think about it today for us, it'd be like, we have lawyers today who specialize in different fields.
Yeah, just certain things.
Right.
I do. Yeah.
If you have a case that is of international law, are you going to hire a divorce lawyer to handle it? Probably, I would definitely not. Technically, they could because they are a lawyer, but they're not going to rule on those cases. They don't know enough about it. And that's the same thing with the Sanhedrin. You had 23 Levites, 23 Cohen, 23 judges there. You had each one of those because they are all about, they're specialized in that area. Now, there are certain cases that required all of them to vote on. Okay? So normally, if it was something to deal with the Levites, then the Levites would vote on it. If it was something to deal with the priests, then the priests would vote on it. If it was a civil matter, then the judges would vote on it. Okay? But if it is certain things, and I'm going to tell you what those certain things were, then all of the members voted on it. Okay? And according to the Mishnah 1:5, if there was a tribe that needed to be judged, if the tribe did something wrong, then all 71 of them had to vote. If they were accusing somebody to be a false prophet, then all of them had to vote. And if it was a case, something involving a high priest, then all of them had to vote. If Israel was going to go to war, they all have to vote. That's just like now. Can President Trump make us go to war?
No.
No. Our government has to vote on that. Yeah.
I don't think he can tell Israel what to do because Israel.
Well, that's different.
Yeah.
But okay, but still, when you think about this, but you got here, the Sanhedrin had to vote whether or not Israel went to war. If Jerusalem wanted to make additions to the city itself, because Jerusalem, that's where the temple was, and to the courtyards of the temple, then all of the Sanhedrin had to vote. If they had little, smaller judges in the cities, these little small Sanhedrins, like groups of 3 in the cities, they would set up Sanhedrins for the tribes. Then all of the Sanhedrin had to vote on that. And if they were going to vote on an entire city, like whether they, like Sodom and Gomorrah, if they were an apostate city or not, or good, the whole Sanhedrin had to vote. So when you look at these cases, these were big cases that involved basically the whole country. Does that make sense?
It's difficult to know law. I mean,
Yeah.
because every country is just,
Right. But when you think about Israel,
yeah, God's law, bad.
because you had it, he established it to where you're going to have a smaller group, and there was always an odd number here, and that so you wouldn't have a tie, and that when it came, if you couldn't handle that, then it went up to the next court. It went up to, there were more people there, and these were specialized, and that they're going to hear this case. And then if they couldn't handle it, then it went to the great Sanhedrin, or the big one. And that is when, depending on the case, who basically
Would this go in the land of the cases that would come in to the Sanhedrin and things?
What do you mean? How far? What do you go?
How far out would they live? The people that come
Well, they set up small Sanhedrins, a group of 3 in cities.
in cities.
Yeah, in certain cities, but the whole Sanhedrin had to vote on one being established there. And they, helped choose who the leaders would be there. But then they would come up to Jerusalem, and that's just like when they were standing before Moses. Just like they stood before Moses from day to night, they would go up to the city gates, and it wasn't one person doing this. You had the group, and that was their job. That's what they did. Mm-hmm. And so this pattern for the Sanhedrin was done in Moses's time. We know the Sanhedrin was operating in Yeshua's day. And then, but we think about in the millennial kingdom, the temple's reestablished. And in the millennial kingdom, when the temple is reestablished, the Aaronic priesthood is once again officiating. And we see that from Ezekiel's vision in Ezekiel 40. verse 45, this is talking about the third temple here. 45, it says, he said to me, the room facing the south is for the Kohanim in charge of the house, and while the room facing the north is for the Kohanim in charge of the altar. These are the descendants who, talking about who these Kohanim are, these are the descendants of Zadok, who are the descendants of Levi, designated to approach Yah and serve him. So in this third temple, who are going to be these priests again are going to be the Aaronic priesthood. Okay. Well, think about it. If the temple's in service, where were the Sanhedrin? 3 places. The outer court of the temple, and then you had the Beit Atinas. Yeah. So you had 3 different places. You had the small Sanhedrin at the court, like right there at the courtyard of the women, and then you had the Beit Atinas. And that is where the Hall of Hewn Stone, that is where you had the third one. And so the Sanhedrin, again, then will be part of that temple service. But we see that Yeshua can't be the Cohen. Hebrews chapter 8, verse 4. If Yeshua is in the millennial kingdom, he is not the priest. Because look at verse 8. It says, chapter 8, verse 4. Hebrews 8, 4. Now, if he were here on earth, talking about Yeshua, he would not be a Cohen at all, since there are already Kohanim offering the gifts required by the Torah. We just read in Ezekiel, right. So you think about, here it is, Ezekiel talks about the third temple coming, and that you've got the sons of Zadok, the Aaronic priesthood coming back in, and that they're going to be the ones there. It's not going to be Yeshua being that priest that is there in the third temple. Okay. So when we think about this pattern for ruling, it was established with Moshe. We see it in the days of Yeshua's life in the Sanhedrin. And then we also see it coming back with the third temple. Okay, so now going back to the parsha. And looking what's happening on the mountain, Exodus 19. So on the 50th day after they left Egypt, they are at Mount Sinai camping. And, this is when Yah sends, Moshe goes up to the mountain, basically with this proposal of marriage. Here we've got the first stage of the marriage ceremony. Okay, which is called a betrothal. Okay, in Exodus chapter 19, verse 2.
Verse what?
2. After setting out from Refidim and arriving at the Sinai desert, they set up camp in the desert. There in front of the mountain, Israel set up camp. And Moshe went up to God, and Yah called to him from the mountain. Here is what you are to say to the household of Yaakov, to tell the people of Israel. You have seen what I did to the Egyptians and how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now, if you will pay careful attention to what I say and keep my covenant, then you will be my own treasure from among the peoples, for all of the earth is mine, and you will be a kingdom of Kohanim for me, a nation set apart. These are the words you are to speak to the people of Israel. So this is basically the betrothal ceremony. And all the people answered and said, all that Yah has spoken will do. So this was their acceptance of the proposal.
Of the Kohanim.
Okay. Basically being, we're going to be your kingdom. Okay. We're going to be a part of this. So and then what was the next stage in the ancient marriage or wedding, whatever, then they were set apart. Okay. This is what's called Kedushin or sanctification. Okay. And verse 9. Exodus 19:9. Yah said to Moshe, see, I'm coming to you in a thick cloud, so the people will be able to hear when I speak with you, and also to trust in you forever. And Moshe had told Yah what the people had said. So Yah said to Moshe, go tell the people today and tomorrow, separate them for me by having them wash their clothing and prepare for the third day. For on the third day, Yah will come down on Mount Sinai before the eyes of all of the people. You are to set limits for the people all around and say, be careful not to go up on the mountain or even to touch its base. Whoever touches the mountain will surely be put to death. No hand is to touch him, for he must be stoned or shot by arrows. Neither animal or human will be allowed to live. When the shofar sounds, they may go up on the mountain. And Moshe went down from the mountain to the people and separated the people for Elohim and they washed their clothing. And he said to the people, prepare for the third day. Don't approach a woman. On the morning of the third day, there was thunder, lightning, and a thick cloud on the mountain. And then a shofar blast sounded so loudly that all the people in the camp trembled. And Moshe brought the people out of the camp to meet God, and they stood near the base of the mountain. And Mount Sinai was enveloped in smoke because Yah descended onto it in fire. And the smoke went up like the smoke of a furnace, and the whole mountain shook violently. So, think about, he's wanting them to be pure. He's telling them, you got to set yourself apart. That's what, a lot of times when we look at the word holy, we don't realize what holy means. Holy is actually kadosh, which means to be set apart, something that's set apart for something. And so here he's wanting us to be pure, and he commands us, the bride, to wash her clothes and to prepare for his coming, just as the bride prepares for her wedding. In order for us to be ready for his coming, we need to be pure. And, we think about even today in a Jewish wedding, the bride and groom actually will mikvah. They will go through a cleansing process before the wedding. And James chapter 4, verse 8, it says, come close to God and he will come close to you. Clean your hands, sinners, and purify your hearts, you double-minded people. And so there's a direct correlation between what Yah commands us in Exodus about washing our garments and about what he says in James about cleansing our hands, because the washing of our clothes and the washing of our hands are basically signifying that outward works of our life. Okay. That, when we're cleansing our clothes and our hands, it should be a picture that the work that Yah has already done and is doing in our hearts or our spirits, that, that Yah has done it. What was on the inside is going to reflect on the outside. It's going to be clean on the inside as well as the outside. Because, and even in John or James, it says, you double-minded people, we're not to have divided loyalties. What's on the inside should reflect what's on the outside. It should be both ways. What's on the outside, if we look good on the outside, it should be the same on the inside.
Even whatever we do, because if we have him inside, then whatever we do with our hands or talking or anything reflects on him.
Reflects on him, yeah.
And it should be all to his glory, or to be, like I said, bride makes herself clean,
right,
makes herself ready.
Yeah.
We have to do that. I know we don't. I don't have to forgive, because you just kind of, I'm going up. I lashed out, shouldn't have done that. God wouldn't have done that. He would forgave me or something.
Yeah. And you think about too, it's been, 50 days since they left Egypt, 7 weeks here. And so since they left Egypt, and you think about, they already had, Passover and unleavened bread, and that, Shavuot is linked with unleavened bread, because if you don't get to Shavuot without having unleavened bread. Okay. because you're counting from there to get to Shavuot. And you think about, currently, when you think about where they are in Exodus, it is in this time period. They've already had Passover. They've had unleavened bread. They're in that in-between time period. They're in that counting of the Omer that's leading up to Shavuot.
I mean, you count that many people, all and counting around each other. Tempers are getting
Right.
ill.
Well, we already seen them complain and
Yeah, I mean, it's understandable,
Mhm.
but it's sometimes you got the mixed multitude that come out. You
Right.
know what I'm saying? So there was that mixing in to egg it on,
Mhm.
you know what I'm saying? And
But then you
they
think
go
about,
against Moses, why didn't you just let us die? Da, 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 da.
well, you think about what that time period is called. What is counting of the Omer? When you think about the Hebraic understanding of counting the Omer, it is a time period when, you are going through this transformation. Yah is taking a group of people that lacked unity and definition, and he's uniting them into one person, one group.
How do they make sure that everyone is doing Shavuot, the things that they're supposed to do? It's so many.
But you got to remember, what did they do?
The Omer.
How did they do it? They only went out, and the Omer is a measure. It was how much manna that fails. That's what I'm saying. They didn't have, that was their, but
They were found out because it rotted on.
right, because it rotted. But that's what you do. If you go out, you were getting your Omer. You were counting the Omer by getting your manna that day.
And
So that's what it was. I mean, you were basically counting the Omer that way. That's how they were doing it.
and you have to look at it at their time too, because they were intent. They had to have a place for, natural.
Well, they would go outside, yeah.
Right. It had to be out, and it had to be clean. It had to show because God even show. So, I mean, there's just a lot you have to look at and realize in that time. I mean,
but that was a purging process. It was a process for them learning how to
be obedient
and not only be obedient, but how to live in a community with other people.
Mm-hmm. Right. Instead of being slaves as their son.
Right. And you think about, that's part of the problem now is look at where we are. We have everybody scattered and here and there, and nobody is really wanting to be a part of a community anymore.
To help one another.
But I'm not talking about help, I'm just talking about like-minded. We don't have, that's why, we've got small groups. You got people here, you got people there, because people don't want to get together and be in a community anymore. And that's where, it is different, because Jews tend to only move, especially if they're religious, to a place where there is somebody that they can have in a community. Yeah. So they can be in a community together.
They originate and want to live close to each other because they all think alike and
being like-minded, but whether or not they don't all necessarily agree, because within that you have a wide variety, but still it comes to that. Okay, one thing that stuck out with me too, look at verse 13. No hand is to touch him. I'm talking about the person who touched the mountain. He must be stoned or shot by arrows. Neither animal nor human will be allowed to live. When the shofar sounds, they may go up on the mountain. So think about this, because, I don't know. I think about, the Indiana Jones and Moses going up on the mountain and stuff like that, that lightning coming out and striking the people, if you disobeyed Yah. But the person who disobeyed Yah and, went up past the border of the mountain, Yah didn't kill him. Because it says they must be stoned. So who had to kill them? The people themselves, yeah. They had to be stoned or shot, in the air. So the congregation
So when it says no hand will touch, that means they can't grab a hold of him or anything. They have to stand back and stone him or either shoot him with an arrow.
Right. Yeah. And you think about it, the congregation themselves are being the ones that would have to stone the person. They are going to be the one that has to rise up against their brother who is disobedient here. And they're looking at that this person is actually paying the consequences of disobeying Yah. But the group themselves, the community is going to have to be the one to do that. So I just thought that was interesting. So
And nobody wanted to do that.
and nobody, yeah, you think about it, nobody would want to do that. I mean, you would think about like,
If you didn't like somebody.
he said if you didn't like somebody, you might want to throw a rock at them. So,
Yeah.
so,
If you have
You better, you better watch out, Eddie.
yep, that's it.
Do you hear what Ken said?
Yeah. Okay, so then we,
I don't think Kenny's that good a shot.
did you hear that, Ken? Did you hear that, what he said, Ken?
I did. I'd already muted
Okay.
myself. Yes, I heard it. Yeah, I'm a good shot, Eddie. Don't
Okay.
forget that.
Don't forget it. Okay. So, and then we come to the reading of the ketubah, the wedding contract, which is the 10 commands or the 10 words. Aseret hadavrim or habitibro. So what's different here is the numbering of them. Okay. Because the traditional Christian Catholic version we've been taught teaches the numbering of the commands a little different. Okay. But when we look, the first 5 commands, and I'm just going to read quickly through those. Okay. In Exodus chapter 20, verse 2, I'm the Lord your God who brought you up out of the land of Egypt. Okay. In Hebrew, it says, Yet Vav He Elohim. The second command, this is where it's different because the second command is, you shall have no other gods before me. In the Catholic version, they put all of that as to one. Okay. But that's actually the second command is you shall have no other gods before me, for I am Yah Elohim or Elohecha. Am a jealous Elohim. Okay. The third command is in chapter 20, verse 7. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God or Yah Elohecha in vain. Okay. And the fourth command, verse 8, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days shall you labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is the Sabbath of Yah Elohecha. Okay. And the fifth command, honor your father and mother the days that your days may be long upon the land which Yah Elohecha is giving you. So all the first 5 all have Yah Elohecha, or the Lord God is what the English version says. So the first 5 all have that. But when you look at the next 5, they don't. Okay. The next 5 are all like negative commands. Okay. But like I said, sometimes we find people who say, well, we only follow the 10 commandments and the others don't apply. Okay. Or we don't have to follow but 2 of the commands. And in Malachi 2:9, remember, they were punished for being partial in applying the Torah. We can't pick and choose. God doesn't give us the authority to do only the things we want to do. He gives us all 10 of these. So the first command, I am Yah your Elohecha who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the abode of slavery. So like I said, this is the first commandment. Why would that be the first commandment?
Just telling who he is.
Who he is. Yeah, you got to have, in order to come into a covenant, you got to know who you're coming into a covenant with. Who is your faith, your emunah, who are you going to believe in? You got to know who you're worshiping. Because there's many gods, because remember, even Yitro said in Exodus 18:11, for now I know that Yah is greater than all the other gods because he rescued those who were treated so arrogantly. So Yitro doesn't say that he's the only God. Yitro says he's greater than all the other gods. We don't necessarily believe that, that there are other gods. We don't see them as other gods, but people do,
Back then, Egypt had all these.
Yeah, they have like hundreds of gods. Yeah.
All over the place.
And you think about it that, it's basically, he's saying that Yah is the supreme God. He's not saying that, he's the only one. He's saying he's the supreme one. And, in Hebrew, there's even a song and a phrase, ain't od milvado, that there is no other. So, and, when you think about this is linked with our faith, our emunah and trust, bitachon, is, Rabbi Noah Weinberg said that those two things, faith and trust, are not separate. Because faith, emunah, requires us to believe. But it is bitachon, or trust, that is actually applying that faith. It's putting it into practice. And, we see how Yah is identifying himself here. He doesn't start with, look at how he says who he is. He says, I am Yah, your Elohim, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the abode of slavery. He doesn't go back and say, I'm the one who started at creation. He makes it personal to them. Yeah. I'm the one who did this for you. This is, he wants us to have that connection and it to be a personal relationship with them. Okay, the second command, like I said, the Catholic and the Christian version lumps this all together. You're to have no other gods before me. You are not to make for yourselves a carved image or any kind of representation of anything in heaven above or the earth beneath or the water below the shoreline. You're not to bow down to them or to serve them, for I am Yah, your Elohim, am a jealous God, punishing the children for the sins of their parents to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, but displaying grace to the thousandth generation of those who love me and obey my mitzvot.
That's all God is saying, this is why you're not him, because of, he's describing all the gods, heaven, earth above, people, worship. So.
They're going to worship, yeah. That's what we tend to do.
And, so that holds
they even worship the bronze snake with the rod.
Yeah.
And that was something supposed to be holy for healing. And I tell you, they just had that mindset because they were in Egypt with all these gods. When they still wanted something that they could see,
right?
Instead of something they could believe in,
right? And you think about, that's what we as a people want to do. We tend to take and make things a god. Whether we think about, we don't have those idols. The Catholic Church does, but we don't really have those idols or things. But how many people put the church building itself and make it a god?
Well, the pastor, you put a child.
Yeah, you put a child, a family member. Yeah,
there's so many things people.
Their job, their business, their car, money, whatever. We tend to take things and make it an idol and make it really a god, and we don't think about we're doing that, but we are.
And when
we think about TV or sports or our kids doing things. And he's like, but really we do. That's what we do.
Yeah, because a few years ago, at one time, within a few months each year, we had 3, maybe 4 pastors to lead the church because they run off with something.
Yeah, and women,
secretary or whatever, and the people you wouldn't even think. I would never have thought them.
Right.
And I didn't. I didn't put my trust in them. I put my trust.
But people tend to look up to them and make them a god, make them.
Frank, with their pastor, and then when he did wrong, it tore them apart.
Right.
They never went back to church. It's just
And so that's why he says, first you got to know who your God is. And then second, don't take and make these other things, whether it be your creation or your job or whatever, and make it be a God.
Because, we can't worship anything because it's not gonna last. We can't hoard, just.
Right.
You have
Well,
to let
okay.
You have to empty yourself out and let yourself be filled with His
Right.
own.
Well, and this was, Eddie, I showed Eddie this yesterday, that Solu, put out a video called, they do desert talks where they just go out in the desert and they just sit and talk about scripture and stuff. And the one that they put out yesterday, I thought was really good because they were talking about, Shiloh said that he had met someone years ago or saw something. I can't remember if he has met someone or saw something. And the person asked and said, if I could, he was a wealthy man, billionaire, whatever, and said, I'll give you $10 million. And, Levi and Sarah were like, yeah, whatever. And he's like, I'll take that. And he's like, but there's a catch. And she's like, yeah, there's always a catch. And said, tomorrow you won't wake up. And they're like, nobody's going to take that. Nobody's going to take, yeah, I'm going to give you $10 million, but tomorrow you won't wake up. And he said, that's the whole point of it. Your life is worth more than having $10 million in your bank account. And so, because everything is about your life, you can't live or praise or worship or do anything without that life. The dead don't praise him, you think about it. And so it's, yeah. And so saying you'll be dead, not like, okay. But anyway, that was just on a sidetrack there. Okay. So we go to the third command. You're not to use lightly the name of Yah your Elohim, because Yah will not leave unpunished someone who uses his name lightly. Most versions say in vain. And we've talked about before that the word in vain means shav, which means emptiness, vanity, lying, falsehood, or worthless. And that is the same word that's used in Exodus chapter 23 and verse 1, where he says, you are not to repeat false rumors. Do not join hands with the wicked by offering a perjured testimony. That word false is the word shav, which is the same word that's talking about taking his name. So many have questioned what this means, and, by looking at what it says here, my version here, my translation, I guess, would say you're not to lift up the name of Yah your Elohim to falsehoods. So, I think, we should use his name, and not using false names and things there, because I do believe there's power in the name, but, because he even tells us to call upon his name, but he also commands us to make a distinction between what is common and set apart. So I think part of that is we have to be careful not to make his name be common.
An everyday word.
Right.
It's just like somebody people or something say, oh God, I hear this all the time.
Right.
Oh no.
Yeah. Or, we need to remember to sanctify it, to keep it set apart. And so that's, and that's why Jews don't say the name. They will say Hashem. They will instead, because they want to keep it set apart. Now I did, but I did see where, like, Rivka said, the impersonal prayer, she does use Yah. And that I've seen, Jeremy Gabel in, songs and stuff, that he will sing Yah and stuff, but it is done in a religious sense. It is not really done outside of that. So, and that's why, for them, understanding why they do that, that's why if they see people that are walking around with t-shirts with the name of Yah on it, a t-shirt, something that could get dirty. That's why it is something that they would not do, because you're using it like something common. So just understanding that viewpoint of it. So I see where they get that. Okay. Anything else on that one? Or are we going to keep going? Okay. Fourth command, remember the day Shabbat to set it apart for God. You are to have 6 days to labor and do all your work, but on the seventh day it is Shabbat for Yah. On it, you are not to do any other kind of work, not you, your son, your daughter, not your male or female slave, not your livestock, not the foreigner staying with you inside your gates to your property. For 6 days, Yah made heaven and earth and the sea and everything in them. On the seventh day, he rested. That is why Yah blessed the day Shabbat and separated it to himself. Now, when you go to the book of Deuteronomy and you look at the 10 words there's a difference. Because in Deuteronomy, in chapter 5, verse 15, it's talking about Shabbat, and it says, you are to remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, that Yah your Elohim brought you out from there with a strong hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore, Yah your Elohim has ordered you to keep the day of Shabbat. So there's a difference, between those two, whether it's in Exodus of why you keep it. And yeah, but in Deuteronomy, he's telling them, okay, you're going to, keep it when you come out of Egypt. But in Exodus, he's telling them it's going back to creation. So, the fifth command, honor your father and mother so that you may live long in the land which Yah your Elohim is giving you. Sixth command, do not murder. There's a difference between murder and killing. So, the seventh command, do not commit adultery. Eighth command, do not steal. Ninth command, do not give false evidence against your neighbor.
That son was just, you don't lie.
Yeah. And then the 10th command, don't covet your neighbor's house, your neighbor's wife, his male or female slave, his ox, his donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. So, now, Exodus 20 and Deuteronomy 5 both give the 10 commands. And here's the question. If Yah is speaking the words directly to Moshe, wouldn't we expect them to be the same in both books?
Yeah.
But they are different. If you do a side-by-side comparison, the fourth command in Exodus 20, it says, verse 8, remember Shabbat, Zakar. And it tells in verse 11, the reason that you're doing Shabbat is because Yah made heaven and earth. But in Deuteronomy 5 and 12, he says, not remember, he says, Shamar, guard the day of Shabbat. And then he adds that, you're not going to do any work on it, not you, your male, your son, your daughter, your male or female slave. And he even includes the animals in Deuteronomy. Not your ox or your donkey or any of your livestock. He does say livestock in the other one, but he doesn't say your ox and donkey. Okay. And in Deuteronomy 5:15, and he says the reason that they are to do it there is not because of creation, but it's because they were a slave in Egypt and Yah brought you out. And so so that's what I'm saying. There's differences. Another difference is in the fifth command. In Exodus 20, you remember I read, honor your father and mother so that you may live long in the land which Yah is giving you. In Deuteronomy 5 and 16, he says to honor your father and mother as Yah has ordered you so that you will live long and have things go well with you in the land. So they have an addition there. And then another difference is in the 10th command. In Exodus 20, verse 14, we said, don't covet your neighbor's house, don't covet your neighbor's wife, his male or female slave, his ox, his donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. And in Deuteronomy, it says a different order. It's the same words, but a different order. In Exodus, he says, don't covet your neighbor's house first, and then his wife. But in Deuteronomy, he says, don't covet his wife and don't covet his house. So it puts his wife first in his house. So those are some differences. Yeah. But then the question comes up, shouldn't they be the same? If he spoke it, yeah.
And there.
Yeah. So should it be the same?
So why is it not?
Why is it not? Did he speak it more than once? Did he,
Well, he wouldn't have God changed.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? He wouldn't have changed it.
yeah.
Wouldn't
So-
it have anything to do with Moses got the commandments,
Mhm.
he broke them, went back up and got them again?
Well,
Would have been a.
But he wouldn't have
would have been a
changed.
different-
but when he changed it, would he changed them?
Would have been different.
But then he had additions too, and something's different. Like, and some of them are completely different.
I'm just, you know.
Yeah, that's a possibility. I mean, and
But God wouldn't change his way
Yeah.
because that would make him unstable.
Yeah.
It didn't change what it was, it just changed the order.
well, it changed the order and it changed the reason why you gave it.
And some he said, Phil.
Yeah, and in Deuteronomy he says to guard, and in Exodus he tells you to observe
Yeah.
and or remember, and so Shabbat. And then, so when you think, I know the Talmud and the Midrash, say about Shabbat that he says, remember and to guard, that they both were actually, this is their saying, they both were actually said and heard simultaneously. But for whatever reason, remember was recorded in Exodus, and in Deuteronomy, they recorded keep.
Which one was first?
In Exodus, it says to remember.
Remember first, and then.
In Deuteronomy, it says to keep or guard. Okay, well, that's, yeah.
Remember and make it whole.
Okay, well, see, that's what the Midrash says, the Talmud says that, oh, he spoke both of them, but they only wrote one down here and they wrote one down here. Okay. And, most of you have been with us a while, and, we've discussed the differences between the books of the Torah before, about how all of Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers were all written third person, but Deuteronomy is written first person. So
So,
what does that say? That says that Moshe's direct words are Deuteronomy.
Yeah.
And, for example, last week's portion, let's go back to Exodus 13. Not 13, 16. Look at this. Talking about the jar of manna. Verse 33. Moshe said to Aaron, take a jar, put 2 quarts of manna in it, and set it aside before Yah to be kept through all of your generations. Just as Yah ordered Moshe and Aaron, set it aside before the testimony to be kept. The people of Israel ate manna for 40 years until they came into the uninhabited land. How did they write that verse? They're just now in the first year of coming out of Egypt. How did they know that they were going to be in the wilderness eating it for 40 years? They had a dream. Nowhere does Yah say you're going to eat manna for 40 years in the wilderness ahead of time.
yeah.
Okay.
Just that he's.
Yeah, he wouldn't have gone. I mean,
He's gonna feed him, and then he fed the quail,
but he doesn't tell them it's going to be 40 years. But so how did they know it was 40 years unless that verse was written after and they knew exactly how long?
And
Right. So this is where, that issue is going back to where that
like,
it was part of it was written later.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying?
yeah, it has to be. Because God ain't gonna change his word.
And when we look at that, that's why I say that I tend to hold things with Deuteronomy more, because that is first person, because it says, Yah said to me, Moshe. It doesn't say Yah said to Moshe. It says Yah said to me. Yah said, and it says, I did this, I did that. Whereas the other one says, Moshe did this, Moshe did that. So it's somebody else writing about Moshe, whether it's a scribe or whatever.
And that's what's so bad. It's when it's written after it's all happened,
Mhm.
Telling it like it's them
Doing it right then. Yeah.
Yeah, and it even in the New Testament, it's, you going, well, if one says this, Matthew says this about the crucifixion, Mark says this about the crucifixion.
Yeah. Well, and it's how they're,
Different.
yeah. And
It happened, but it's just who wrote them later.
as to whose viewpoint they're looking from it. Yeah.
Something, I guess, wasn't it?
And how they're looking at the viewpoint of it. Yeah.
I'm going,
Because you think about an accident, a person can see an accident. You can have multiple people see the same accident and they're going to give different stories. That's why they tell you, the police wants to talk to people individually to see if they can figure out the true story there.
Yeah.
But when we think about this, even though we seem to have discrepancies here, it doesn't make the Torah invalid. Like I said, I personally believe that Deuteronomy, because it's the first person account, is, more direct. And so I tend to hold with that one more. And just because the authorship is not determined doesn't necessarily make the Torah invalid. Thinking about as we end on these two verses that, some people will dispute the Torah, and there are a couple important verses in Deuteronomy 30:12 through 14. It tells us that the Torah is not too hard for us. And many, most of us came out of the church that says you can't do it. But that goes against the word, because the word itself says you can do it. And in Proverbs 28, verse 9, it says, he that turns away his ear from hearing the Torah, even his prayer would be an abomination. And so these commands that are given to Moshe are our ketubah, our wedding contract, our agreement that we are his. And so as we look at our lives, are our lives displaying that we are his according to the contract? Because these aren't man-made, commands. These were revelations from Yah. And every commandment really is safeguarding something essential for us. Like no other gods before is basically safeguarding or protecting our identity and our purpose. By us not having false idols, it's keeping us free from these false masters. Honoring our parents is showing that we have stability, generational stability. Not murdering, it shows we have a value of life. Not stealing, we value security and property. Not committing adultery, we're showing we value covenant and family. Not bearing false witness, that we are valuing truth and justice, and by not coveting, that we have an inner peace and contentment. And so these aren't really restrictions on us, they're protections for us. And that this was basically Yah bringing us into a closer relationship with him. And these commandments are the terms of the covenant. It's an invitation for us to live as a people that are showing that we're shaped by justice and holiness and compassion, and that they're not just laws to obey, but it was a way of living a righteous life. So
I'm looking also, if you obey all those laws, you'll be blessed.
yeah, you're definitely going to be blessed by obeying those. So anybody else have anything you guys want to contribute? Questions, comments, talk, whatever. Nope, everybody's quiet.
Thank you.
Everybody's
Lisa.
quiet today. Okay, let me get right here. Eddie's getting ready to come over. Get ready for the blessing. So,
Give it a minute, shot.
okay. We're waiting on you. We are waiting on you.
They started.
Okay. Come on. You got anything you want to say since everybody's so quiet today?
Right now, let me get that.
All right.
You got one there?
You're getting it back.
Yep.
I least expect.
Yeah.
Okay. Got it. Yep. Okay.
Amen. Good lesson, amen. Yeberekaka Yahavavirish Meireha Yair Yahava Penava Ileka Vihuneka Yesayava Penavileka Vayashem Leka Shalom. May Yah bless you and keep you. May Yah make his face shine on you and show you his favor. May Yah lift up his face towards you and give you peace. B'Shem Yeshua HaMashiach. Sar Shalom. Go in peace. Amen. Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat, 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 Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat, 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 Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat, 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 Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat, 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 Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat, 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 Shabbat Shalom. I think, see, today is the what, 7th?
Mm-hmm.
I think what we're trying to shoot for, and everybody look on their calendar, is for the 20. Let me see what